Good morning, I'm Maiki Oreta and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots, and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Let's dive right in. The government's debt service more than triples to 664.72 billion pesos in August. Local economists hold their growth forecasts even as a widening corruption scandal tests investor confidence. And Bitcoin smashes past $125,000, setting a new all-time high. First, let's check on how global financial markets moved on Friday. Last Friday, U.S. stocks closed mixed in a volatile session as expectations for interest rate cuts hold firm while the government shutdown continues. The U.S. non-farm payroll report for September doesn't come out due to the closure, but investors focus on a survey from the Institute for Supply Management, which shows the Services Employment Index contracts for the fourth straight month. The data adds to the case for more rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 0.5%, the S&P 500 flat with a very slight upward bias. The Nasdaq Index down by 0.3%. Over in Europe, markets are they also closed mixed. London's FTSE 100 higher by 0.7%. Germany's DAX lower by 0.2%, and France's CAC 40 higher by 0.3%. Here at home, the government's debt service bill surges, more than tripling in August to 664.72 billion pesos. Latest data from the Bureau of Treasury shows payments jumped from just 186.22 billion pesos in the same month last year. The bulk came from amortization or principal payments, which spiked to 601.62 billion pesos, up sharply from 133.44 billion pesos a year ago. The spike highlights the growing burden of public debt and renews calls to curb corruption and improve spending efficiency so borrowed funds translate into real results. Now, despite political turmoil and widening corruption probes, economists are betting that domestic demand will keep the economy on track. Union Bank kept its GDP growth outlook at 5.5% for 2025, with a 5.7% projection for 2026, supported by strong household spending and investments. BPI and Pantheon Macroeconomics also maintained their forecasts at 5.6% and 5.3% respectively, with Pantheon describing its view as already on the downbeat side. However, the government's flood control corruption probe is expected to slow infrastructure spending and dent investor sentiment. International institutions like the ADB and the IMF have also lowered their Philippine growth outlooks, citing global uncertainties and the domestic political climate. Now, a tougher tone from Malacanang. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is demanding airtight cases against those behind anomalous and ghost flood control projects, saying that the public deserves real accountability. In a teaser for his next podcast, the president said many of those now under investigation are far from guiltless, stressing that prosecutors must file strong, well-documented cases backed by solid evidence. He also reiterated that the fight against corruption must be rooted in the rule of law to ensure accountability while upholding due process. The Independent Commission on Infrastructure, formed by the president, continues to investigate irregularities in flood control and other public works projects spanning the past decade. A new budget controversy is brewing. Lawmakers questioning the 250 billion peso unprogrammed funds in next year's budget, warning that they could become a slush fund for corruption. Akbayan Party List Representative Chel Diokno urged the government to itemize spending and prioritize essential services like education and health instead of leaving billions unaccounted for. The House Committee on Appropriations agreed that itemization is ideal, but defended unprogrammed funds as flexible reserves for foreign-assisted projects and emergency needs. Diokno pointed out that 97 billion pesos for foreign-aided programs and 80 billion pesos for infrastructure and social projects should be moved into the regular budget for greater transparency. Representative Percy Tendanya, meanwhile, called for scrapping unprogrammed funds altogether, warning that such pools could be diverted to controversial infrastructure projects already under scrutiny. The concern goes beyond accounting. Transparency in public spending is crucial for investor confidence and for restoring trust in the government at a time when corruption allegations continue to mount. A new twist in the flood control controversy. Senate President Pro Tempore Panfilo Lacson has quit as chair of the Blue Ribbon Committee amid criticism over how he handled the high-profile probe. Lacson says he's stepping aside to preserve the integrity of the investigation, vowing his crusade against corruption will continue. Hannah T. reports.
Senate President Pro Tempore Panfilo Lacson is stepping down as chairman of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee. In a statement, Lacson said he decided to step down after some of his colleagues expressed disappointment over how he handled the Blue Ribbon investigation into the flood control project anomalies. He added that if he has already lost the trust of his peers, then he's ready to give way. But he was quick to clarify that his fight against corruption is far from over. The Blue Ribbon Committee is currently investigating the flood control scandal and alleged budget insertions. For now, its next hearing is suspended until further notice. Lacson said the October 8 hearing was cancelled because the documents needed for the investigation, including the alleged tell-all affidavits of contractors Sara and Curly Descaya, were not yet ready. Two high-profile personalities are expected to attend the next hearing: former House Speaker Martin Romualdez and former Ako Bicol Party List Representative Zaldico, who were both invited by Lacson. Lacson also slammed what he called fake news being spread by certain groups claiming he was protecting Ko and Romualdez. Senator Amy Marcos earlier expressed confusion over reports that the Blue Ribbon Committee would no longer hold hearings and would instead issue a partial report. Lacson responded by saying that Marcos should simply attend the hearings herself so she wouldn't be misinformed. Later on, Marcos left the All Senators group chat, citing pressures she claimed were happening within the chamber. Lacson replaced Senator Rodante Marcoleta as Blue Ribbon Chair, following the Senate leadership shakeup that also saw Senate President Tito Soto replace Senator Cheese Escudero. Hannah T. Bilyonaryo News Channel.
A deepening corruption scandal is now spilling into real estate, with analysts warning that the Philippines' luxury property market could be the next casualty. Property experts say the controversy, sparked by allegations of graft in flood control projects, is cooling sentiment among high-end buyers and could lead to price stagnation and slower sales of ultra-luxury homes. The scandal, fueled by social media posts showing officials and contractors living in excess, has prompted a cautious tone in the market. Analysts add that if more corruption-linked transactions come to light, individuals with questionable income sources may delay purchases or start liquidating assets. The Department of Finance reports that the country has already incurred over 118 billion pesos in economic losses since 2023, a reminder that corruption doesn't just erode trust, it hits growth and the demand for property. Senate Minority Leader Alan Peter Cayetano has proposed a drastic measure for the government to regain the people's trust amid the flood control scandal. In a social media post, Cayetano suggested that every government official, from the president down to Congress, to resign and conduct a snap election. That's with the additional condition that no incumbent would be allowed to run for one election cycle. The Senate Minority Leader states that now, more than ever, politicians are seen as suspects as calls for another people power movement grow louder. Cayetano says that a voluntary surrender of power is the more responsible path forward. He adds that the government has its bureaucracy and LGUs will continue to run and manage things while the process takes place. Cayetano's suggestion seems to have gained the support of political strategist Lito Banayao. In a statement sent to BNC, Banayao says that Cayetano's call for a snap election is constitutionally possible only if all of the nationally elected officials resign en masse, adding that it reflects the public's wide disenchantment over government and a total resentment about how their taxes have gone into greedy pockets. He also says that the system that allows this kind of greed to fester needs a cleansing, and people may find 2028 too distant for change. On another front, exports are the economy's lifeblood, bringing in dollars, creating jobs, and fueling manufacturing growth. But that engine is under strain with new U.S. tariffs, weak global demand, and rising costs threatening to slow momentum. Electronics, which account for nearly 60% of Philippine exports, are now at the center of that pressure. To help us break down the outlook, we're joined by Dan Lachica, the president of the Semiconductor and Electronics Industries in the Philippines Foundation, or SAPI. Good morning, Dan. Thank you for being here with us.
Good morning, Maiki, and good morning to your viewers. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Dan, we're now in the fourth quarter, which is traditionally peak season for exporters. From where you sit, how healthy is the export sector as we close out this year?
Well, we initially projected flat performance for this year, for 2025, but looking at year-to-date numbers, specifically through August, there seems to be some movement upward. So we may see some modest growth by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because the expectation was for flat growth. And now this is a surprise to the upside. Modest is better than flat any day. Electronics rose 7.4% in the first 8 months of to 29.5 billion US dollars. How would you describe that performance, Dan, in the first 8 months?
Well, on one hand, there were concerns regarding, the geopolitical situation, the U.S. tariff, and even right now, the prevailing conditions in the Philippines, right? But fortunately, we play in the global market, and as such, we respond to the demand for emerging and current technologies, whether it's AI, IoT, big data, etc. So that's really what's driving the expected growth for the industry.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last year's total hit $42.7 billion with expectations for moderate growth this year. What's the outlook for 2025, and are you on track to hit that modest outlook?
I think we will. We just had our board meeting last month, and we maintained our flat projection growth. But as I've said earlier, we will be surprised. We might be surprised with some modest growth. Maybe I don't want to jinx it, and again, I don't know what's going to happen for the next few months. But we're definitely, I think we will surpass the $42.7 billion number. Mm-hmm. We will revise our projection by Q4 when we have our board meeting in Q4. And hopefully we'll announce some good news considering what's been happening in the Philippines today.
Yeah, but your outlook for that, is it looking like 45 billion US dollars? How far or how close to 42.7 billion for 2025?
I wouldn't venture at this point, Mikey, but
okay.
45 is reachable. 45 is doable, I think, but I just don't want to spook anyone by saying, okay, we will exceed or we will fall below 45, because a lot of agencies, react to that kind of projection, as you know.
Right. Okay. As you say, $45 billion is doable for 2025. What are the product lines that are holding up, and what are the ones that are under pressure most?
Right now, what we see would be demand for automotive electronics, medical, even data storage, as you know, with big data coming up, and the demand for information and cybersecurity, right? On the other side, we've seen a softening in office equipment and even radar equipment. So those are the main drivers, both on the positive and the negative side.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the 19% U.S. tariff took effect in August. Electronics are not directly affected because of the exemptions, but that could change. How exposed, 60%, that's a chunk of our exports. How exposed would this industry be if those exemptions were lifted?
It will definitely change. It could change. As you know, the U.S. Supreme Court is actually challenging the legality of the reciprocal tariff that President Trump has imposed. He's falling back on Section 232 of the U.S. Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which says that products, which would affect U.S. security and economy, could be exempted from the tariff, and that's what it's doing now, right? And as I've said, U.S. semiconductor exports and some EMS products are currently exempted. But we've also heard that he's considering jacking it up to 100% tariff or even 300%. But it just remains to be seen. The final decision, or so we've heard, would be, somewhere in Q1. But we don't know what's going to happen, right? The other fallback there would be the IEEPA, which is essentially granting emergency powers to the president in extraordinary situations. So that's the other consideration that the U.S. Supreme Court will be looking at. But right now, what we tell our members is, we don't have crystal balls, and we just have to act on the best data we have available. Definitely no analysis paralysis, and nothing remains in a standstill in a very dynamic semiconductor and electronics environment. So we just try to make the best decisions based on what we know.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, Dan, our global image, especially in this industry, it matters a lot. And corruption has been in the spotlight, especially after the president's sauna. Overseas, recent headlines link the Philippines to corruption, political infighting, and even disasters like the Cebu earthquake. How does this affect the country's global image and our long-term ability to attract investors?
It definitely is a major concern. I mean, in my opinion, there's some level of corruption in every country. But again, the magnitude that we've seen for this event is, quite shocking, right? I mean, if you look at, for example, how much we've lost for the corruption, say if you put it at 20% of the budget, that's about 1 trillion pesos. And just look at how much could be spent for infrastructure, hospitals, and all other projects benefiting the community and the citizenship. So it is a concern. Safety is apolitical. We're not going to get into the muddled situations, but we just hope that, as we join other business communities in hopefully seeing a fast resolution, and holding people accountable to plug the gap and stop this rampant corruption. It's a tall order, we know that, but we just hope for the best and pray for the best.
Economists estimate that at least up to 20% of the national budget, roughly the size of our education and infrastructure budgets combined, is lost to corruption annually. As an industry leader, what's the extent of the accountability you want to see?
Again, we're not judges, but we just hope that the prevailing justice system works. The more important thing really is to expedite the investigation and the action and hold the people accountable, which some of them are out of the country, as we know. Some of them keep denying the accountability despite the proof, which is a natural reaction, right? But we hope that we rely on the justice system to prevail and be efficient about it.
Yeah, everybody has their ideas of what justice would be. Just over the weekend, Senator Alan Peter Cayetano proposed a mass resignation and a snap elections, where no incumbent, meaning no one currently in office, would be allowed to run again. What are your thoughts on this? Dan?
I'm not a political expert, but realistically, I think that's that may not be realistic. For one thing, just in the national elections, can you imagine the process, the expense, the delays, and the difficulties in holding that? Holding snap elections for every position in the government, except in the LGUs, would be a reach, in my opinion. Again, it's my opinion. It's not SAPI's position.
Yeah,
but
correct.
I guess if you look at other countries, if ever there were snap elections, it's the leader where most of the responsibility really falls upon, right? So mass elections for every government position, in my opinion, may not be the solution, may not be the realistic solution.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan La Chica. That's all the time we have for today. But thank you for sharing your thoughts on exports and more with us.
Thank you, Maiki. God bless you and all our viewers.
All right, we're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most, the bottom line. Welcome back. Let's check on Asian markets this Monday morning. Right now, the Nikkei 225 is trading to the upside. It's really up now, up by almost 4.5% in early trade. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is down by 0.5%. Shanghai's Composite up by 0.5%, and Singapore's Straits Times Index trading flat with an upward bias. Here at home, the local market closed last week on a strong note, extending its winning streak to 3 sessions last Friday. The main gauge jumped 1.14% or 69 points to finish at 61.08 as investors continued to scoop up bargains after the recent sell-off. The broader all-share index also rose 0.7% to 36.85. For the week, the PSCI added 82 points after briefly falling below the 6,000 mark early on. Bargain hunting and repositioning ahead of key economic data helped lift investor sentiment, though trading remains thin, showing investors are still cautious amid political noise and global uncertainty. For this week, all eyes are on the September inflation data out tomorrow and the BSP's policy meeting on Thursday. Analysts expect inflation to come in at about 1.9%, while most see the central bank holding rates steady after 3 straight cuts. Near-term support is seen at 6,000 and secondary support at 5,800, with resistance at around 6,200. A clear break above that level could open the door to stronger gains. For now, investors remain guarded, but low inflation print or dovish BSP signals could give the PSCI the push it needs to finally climb past 6,200 this week. Taking a look at the main gauge today, right now, as of 10:23, it's trading to the upside, up by 0.25% to 61.23. All shares index up by about as much, up by 0.25% as well to 36.95. Taking a look at these sub-indices, we're looking at a mixed picture. The industrial, holding firms, and services sectors are keeping the market's gains in check, while the other sectors are in positive territory, with the mining and oil counter up by 3.2% in early trade. Total volume traded is at 198 million shares, valued at 611 million pesos. Market breadth is positive, with 76 advancers, 58 decliners, and 63 stocks unchanged. Taking a look at the currencies, the peso opened at 58.05 to the dollar, down from its previous close of 57.88. And speaking of the peso, it may gain more ground this week as the ongoing U.S. government shutdown shakes global market confidence and puts pressure on the dollar. Terry Wiseman, global foreign exchange and rate strategist at Macquarie in New York, warns that if the shutdown drags on for weeks, it could fuel doubts about U.S. governability, a factor that usually weakens the greenback. He notes that when markets start questioning a country's stability, its currency is often the first to feel the impact. On the corporate front, port giant ICTSI is doubling down on Subic, securing new long-term deals to run the bay's main container terminals until 2058. In a disclosure, ICTSI said that Subic Bay International Terminals Corporation and ICTSI Subic Incorporated can now operate and manage new container terminals 1 and 2 until 2058. Together known as Subic Bay International Terminals, the two firms operate inside of the Subic Bay Freeport Zone. As part of their expansion plan, the companies will invest over $130 million in new equipment and civil works aimed at boosting efficiency and increasing capacity from 600,000 to 1 million containers a year. The terminals serve as a critical trade gateway for northern and central Luzon, providing direct access to major shipping routes and national highways, supporting businesses in Subic and Clark Freeports, as well as provinces like Pampanga, Bataan, Tarlac, and La Union, solidifying Subic's role as a regional logistics hub. SM Prime Holdings continues its share buyback program, purchasing 286,900 common shares from the open market. In a disclosure, SM Prime says that the transactions took place on October 3 at prices ranging from 22 pesos and 45 centavos to 22 pesos and 60 centavos per share. Following the buyback, the company's outstanding shares fell to 28.867 billion, while Treasury shares rose to 4.300 billion. The buyback is part of SM Prime's efforts to enhance shareholder value and reinforce market confidence amid volatile trading conditions. Now, Megaworld Corporation announces the latest round of its share buyback program, purchasing 636,000 common shares from the open market. In a disclosure, Megaworld says that the transaction took place on October 3 at 2 pesos and 3 centavos per share. After the buyback, the company's outstanding shares declined to 32.550 billion, while Treasury shares rose to 1.196 billion. The move is part of Megaworld's ongoing strategy to support its stock price and signal confidence in the company's growth outlook amid, again, volatile market conditions. On another front, the Labor Department is cracking down on workplace safety, issuing a cease and desist order against a Cebu-based BPO company for failing to protect its employees during disasters. The DOLE says that the company had no disaster response plan in place and urged it to implement flexible working arrangements instead. Cebu City's Vice Mayor, Tommy Osmeña, says that he has met with one of the BPOs and the Assistant Regional Director of DOLE, and he will meet with more firms on Tuesday to discuss disaster risk management protocols, among other things. BNC reached out to the IT and Business Process Association of the Philippines for comment, but we have yet to receive a response. Now, as the ground settles in Cebu, global markets are trembling for a different reason. Bitcoin just hit a new record. The cryptocurrency is on a winning streak, surging to $125,245 on Sunday, up nearly 2.7%. Its previous high was $124,480 in mid-August. Now, Bitcoin has risen for 8 straight sessions, boosted by strong U.S. stock gains and continued inflows into Bitcoin exchange-traded funds. For emerging markets like the Philippines, Bitcoin's rally signals stronger global risk appetite, but also warns that hot money could shift away from stocks and currencies and into crypto. Now, former Manila Electric Company president and CEO Oscar Reyes has passed away. He passed on Friday at the age of 79. Meralco extends its condolences to the Reyes family. It also paid tribute to Reyes, who led Meralco from 2012 through to 2019. The power distributor said Reyes exemplified steadfast and humble leadership, leaving an enduring mark on Meralco, the energy sector, and on the countless lives he touched. Now, Bank of the Philippine Islands' former president and CEO Javier Loinaz has passed away on Saturday, October 4th, about a week short of his 82nd birthday. In a community post, BPI said that it mourns the passing of Loinaz and joins his family in grief and remembrance. Under Loinaz's leadership from 1982 to 2004, BPI navigated the 1980s debt crisis and the 90s Asian financial crisis. He pioneered major innovations, including the introduction of ATMs in the 80s and internet banking in 1999, transforming the Philippine banking landscape in the process. BPI President T.G. Limcaoco remembers Javier Loinaz as a visionary leader, mentor, and inspiration who taught discipline, integrity, and purpose. And that's it for Business 360. I'm Maiki Oreta. Thank you for joining us, and keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.